Welcome back, my erudite friends, to another edition of MonteCristo's global League of Legends Power Rankings, the Thinking Fans Power Rankings. Now that the dust has settled on the start of the 2024 season, and we're over the hump of teams adapting to all of the changes that Riot threw at us this year, we're able to have a few tools to measure the best teams in the world. Now, keep in mind, there will be some omissions from this top 10 that may seem glaring if you just are looking at the results and the standings within particularly the LPL. Now, the reason why this is because LPL is a single round robin, which means that strength of schedule plays a massive role in how good a team can look. So teams with losing records that you're going to see on this power ranking, I believe, are better than teams that are nearly undefeated in LPL simply because of the competition that they have faced. It is hard to put them up into the upper echelons of the global elite. Now, these include teams such as NIP and IG, both of which, as the time of this recording, have only one loss. They're both 4-1, and in fact, the second and third place teams within the LPL. But I think if you look at their actual strength of schedule, and particularly the teams that they've lost to and the way that they've lost these matches, you will understand some of my rationale. Also absent are going to be D+ Kia. Now, this team does have some very strong players on it, and Lucid is certainly in contention for Rookie of the Year in the LCK, but they've dropped matches to Kwangdong, and in spite of having, a pretty good game one against GenG, they haven't been there with their consistency, and they're really failing the eye test in terms of kind of mid to late game macro play, which is exactly where they were last year, even though they switched players. So, with that said, let us begin our power rankings, and you may be surprised at this, but at number 10, we have G2 from the LEC. They are coming off an extremely dominant best of 5 against BDS and clearly look like the team to beat in Europe at this point in time. When we think about how they stack up against kind of 4th, 5th teams in LCK and LPL, I think that beyond the top 2 in each of those regions, maybe top 3 if you're in LPL, we've kind of seen some pretty serious flaws, and G2 looks really complete right now. They came off kind of a slow start to the season. Obviously, their performance in the initial weekend of best of ones was not good, but they've been ramping up over time, and now we're really seeing some extraordinary play from them, honestly. They have hugely deep champion pools and some of the most creative drafts in the world. You can see the way they really foiled BDS's attempt to use the pick composition that has gotten them deep into LEC winter so far, with picks like Twisted Fate to reveal their location. We also saw some great flexibility in their drafts when it comes to moving the Yasuo around into a typical Gnar counter in the top side. This team really does a very good job of being deceptive in draft and using the versatility of each individual player to their maximum in order to gain advantages. On top of that, their mid to late game shot calling has been extremely solid so far, even with a variety of team compositions. They always know their win conditions, and this has been wonderful to watch. They clearly look like a very complete team right now. Can they hang with some of Asia's best on an individual level? I would argue that Caps in his current state of performance, as well as Mickey X, certainly can compete. We do have questions about this team, however, such as when we move to a meta that maybe may not be so friendly to Hansama's champion pool. Is there going to be an issue with Hansama there? Potentially. Also, we have to watch Broken Blade's international performance. He did well at MSI last year, but hanging with some of the elite top laners in the world can be very difficult. So G2, number 10. At number 9, this is probably one of the biggest surprises of this season so far, but I'm putting Kwangdong Freecs here. We really can't ignore the fact that they've gotten some pretty important wins against teams like KT and D+ Kia. And ever since the addition of Bull, replacing Taeyun, their bot lane has been massively bolstered. Bull is a very fun, very aggressive player to watch. He's also surprisingly low economy for an AD carry, and he's been able to, with some over-aggressive moments slot very nicely into this team, but he's certainly throwing a lot less than Taeyun was. Right now, we have to have a pretty honest conversation about Cuz maybe being the MVP of LCK. He has been a massive playmaker on this team, has really passed the eye test. Dudu was always a strong top laner, but was on a weak team, and now I think people are seeing that he can be incredibly good. Bulldog is, quietly actually doing a huge percentage of this team's damage while being relatively kind of low economy himself. A lot of the resources are going into Dudu and Cuz on this roster, but Bulldog has been playing kind of a lot of poke champions, particularly, Corki and Talia to a great deal of success. So while he may not be the best mid laner in the league, he certainly is doing his job. One factor that we have to watch with this team is some of the younger players, notably like Bulldog and Bull and Andil, are putting too much pressure on the map at points in the mid to late game, which gets them caught out. They're not careful enough with where they are in terms of forward positioning on the map. But I really like the potential for growth of this team. And with CV Max, rookies tend to do quite well. So I'm excited to see what they can do the rest of the split. And they have become kind of a dark horse for a, potential even semifinal placement within LCK playoffs. At number 8, we are going to have LNG. Now, LNG made some pretty crucial roster moves during the offseason. Obviously, not bringing back Tarzan was a decision. I mean, yes, he had a very bad performance at Worlds, but at the same time, the Tarzan Scout synergy was an enormous part of LNG's success and identity. And it was that success that took them to a 2 full 5-game series against JDG in summer. Weiwei and Mark were added. Now, Hung was arguably their support player, the weakest part of their roster by the time we got into late summer and Worlds last year. And Weiwei coming over to replace Tarzan just hasn't really replaced that synergy that we saw with Scout. I would say, even though this is a very strong team, some of their engages look a little shaky, as if Scout and Weiwei are not on the same page, which has actually caused them to have losses in terms of mid to late game team fightings. Mark has been getting better, but I think had a shaky start and still isn't actually such a massive improvement over Hung, to the degree that I wonder if we're kind of going to see Hung at some point. They're still struggling to adapt as a team. And you may be asking, why is this team on the top 10 when they actually have this losing record in 2 and 3 in LPL? And the answer to that is simply strength of schedule. Right now, LNG, they had an embarrassing loss right away to Thunder Talk, but they bounced back pretty quickly. Beat Weibo, actually, lost 1-2 to JDG, and then lost to BLG, which is the best team in the LPL. This isn't going to end soon in terms of their tough schedule, because in the coming week, they have to play top Esports and NIP. And while I think NIP is weaker than their record indicates, that it's going to be a really crucial game to see in the next edition of the Power Rankings, whether it's NIP or LNG that truly kind of deserve this spot at the lower end of the top 10. Coming in at number 7, KT Rolster. Now, I think this team is incredibly fraudulent, because this is the team that is both going to beat some of the best teams on their good days and lose to some of the worst teams on their bad days. We saw the upside of this, obviously. KT defeating GenG 2-0. What a surprise, right? Also playing a very dominant game 1 in their series against T1. And when we see Pioshik and Beryl playing up to their potential alongside a world-class player like Deft, this team has a very high ceiling. But then we also get some sketchy games against DRX in there. And the loss to Kwangdong Freecs, which looked really sloppy. And so they are going to live up to their Rolster roller coaster name. They've also kind of, if you use the high test, been really lucky at times. You watch that GenG series, and there are times where if Beryl dies, maybe the game goes the other direction, but he'll live with just a fraction of health. And I can't honestly believe that that's intentional. There are some overextensions that I think, have fallen their way in terms of just not getting punished. But they also have Perfect in the top side, who is, I think, developing nicely as a weak side top laner. He's often left out to dry by his jungler, who focuses Pyosik focuses very heavily around the bot side in most games. But his mentality seems very good in that even when he has a bad game, in lane particularly, by the end of the game, he is finding ways to be useful, even though he may be a little bit poor compared to the enemy top laner because he's fallen so far behind and may not have the itemization he wants. And he's also shown an ability to bounce back. I mean, he's had some, a Gnar game in particular that was very impressive. So I think with KT, I struggle to think that they are going to maintain this form. But with the players they have, but for right now, you can't deny a win over GenG, right? You can't deny a win over GenG. Coming in at number 6, we have another Korean team in Hanwha Life. This team retained, or actually gained, I should say, the GenG core of Delight, Peanut, and Doran from last season. Now, Peanut is certainly one of the most authoritative and skilled shot callers in the world. And what comes with that is kind of a very high floor of macro play, where early game pathing, Peanut is phenomenal at. Late game shot calling, Peanut is phenomenal at. And you already see that reflected within the performance of this team, which is to be expected when the majority have played with Peanut before and they're used to playing around his style. Now, Peanut is going to have to adapt because he's got Zeka in the mid lane instead of Chovy. And GenG's old style of Chovy go side lane, get huge, and win team fights for us is not necessarily going to be successful with a very different player in Zeka. They also have had some really big consistency issues with Zeka. Like, even though they're winning games with Zeka playing Corki, Zeka has looked fucking terrible at Corki and was the single biggest factor in their loss to Team 1. This team really lacks a true second carry. And when it comes to cracking into the top 5 teams in the world or being capable of contending for an MSI or Worlds title, they really need to figure out a secondary carry to Viper, because Viper still looks absolutely incredible in terms of his mechanics, his team fighting. Viper and Delight should be a really incredible bot lane. But with Zeka performing the way he is, and with his still rather limited champion pool and his ability to add new champions to his pool quickly, like his Azir is still pretty mediocre, even though he's been playing it for years at this point. The level of improvement has been quite slow. And especially in some of these control mage matchups, he got absolutely bopped by Faker. So I have concerns about Hanwha. So perhaps a lower ceiling than some of the elite teams in the world, but a very, very high floor. And it's hard to believe that they are even capable of falling out of the top 4 in LCK. At number 5, back to the LPL, and this is JDG. JDG is returning this year with a very different roster. They still have their incredibly dominant, if not the best bot lane in the world in Ruler and Missing. But they're bringing in Flandre in the top lane, who is coming off a break to replace 369. And this has been much more effective than I thought it would be. Flandre has looked really good on some of the carries that he's been playing, much better than I think most people would have expected, especially because it's changed the identity of this team pretty significantly. And last year, as many of us said, just because 369 is playing tanks in the top lane and they're playing front-to-back team fights doesn't mean that 369 can only play tanks. It was the way that this team worked, simply as a very high fundamentals, team fighting focused front-to-back effort from JDG. They established this identity, and they only lost one best of 5 all year doing it. So you can hardly blame them for not wanting to experiment more when their dominance was so complete up until the very tail end of the World Championship. But they are struggling a bit to find this new identity right now. But we also have a very low sample size for JDG, which means that we could see this team rise pretty significantly. As of right now, they have actually only played 3 best of series. They are 3-0, but they played the fewest number of matches of any team in the LPL. But they've taken some impressive wins, notably dealing NIP their only loss and beating LNG in a close series. So I expect this team to gel and possibly rise as the season goes on. But for right now, with only 3 matches, it's very hard to conclusively say that they are better than the other teams in the top 5. And number 4, Top Esports. This team has already revealed a certain style that they've liked to go for. They brought in Cream, the mid laner who was on OMG last split, and 369 has moved over to Top Esports from JDG. Now, as I said previously when discussing JDG, it wasn't that 369 couldn't play top lane carries. It's just that was not his role in that super stacked JDG roster. Instead, this time, he is actually back on carries, and Top Esports has really been heavily preferring double AD compositions with AP tops. So what this means is that Cream has played Tristana more than any other champion so far in their matches, and we've seen Rumble, Kennen, these kind of tops for 369, and you get to actually enjoy 369's ability to carry this game. Check out the second game of their match versus Weibo, which was really ropey from Top Esports in the early game, but 369 clutches this game out and has a miraculous come from behind victory with some phenomenal Rumble play, catching Weibo out in the late game. That looked like it was doomed for sure, but damn, 369 super clutch. Right now I would say Top Esports does make me a little bit nervous with some of their early game performances, but they are coming in with very strong results overall. They are 3-1. Their only loss was a 3-gamer versus BLG. They did win a game, but the other 2 games were pretty dominant, particularly game 1 from BLG. So I do think BLG is kind of on another tier compared to this team. But we also don't really weight like first match of this season very seriously. Like we're not going to do that, like weight it super hard because teams are coming in on the new meta, maybe after taking long breaks. So I don't think first matches or first weeks are super indicative of a team's power level right now. So I do give them a little bit of a pass for that loss to BLG. But overall, they have had some struggles that are difficult to ignore while still being a very elite team. At number 3, we have a team that up until recently probably would have been higher, but right after the Lunar New Year, what do GenG do? But they fumble the match to KT Rolster, and they lose really convincingly. You can see that this is a team that is trying to experiment a little bit more right now, which is why I give them a bit of a pass. At the start of the split, they were really focusing on Canyon being on engaged tanks. So what this means is Maokai, Rel, Sejuani. Sure, we saw a brand game, but it was very much like, let us have a stable compositional identity. It was only kind of in this KT game, now he's playing Xin Zhao. Now he's playing Jarvan. So he's kind of switched up his role to more skirmishing or early game pressure. And this really didn't work for them. I think that this team is going to take a while to settle on the way they play and diversify their playing styles, just because, first off, the players that remain, so Pays and Chovy, lost Peanut, who is that authoritative macro voice. And they're trying to figure out, how do we do this right now? I know Chovy has taken up more of a shot calling role, and so has Canyon within this team. So it is less single voice and more a couple players kind of figuring it out, what they want to do alongside Lehens. So it's more, I would say, collaborative than it was previously. But this has also led to GenG maybe making some macro mistakes in the late game that they wouldn't have made domestically previously. Now, of course, if you only watch them international play, they would make macro mistakes all over the place. But this team was really tight in terms of macro within the context of LCK regular season and playoffs. And we are seeing a bit more of a scramble and indecisiveness in the late game than we used to. But, the individual player strength is obviously enormous right now. The early game has been very clean in some of their wins. So even if they have a few mistakes late that drag the game on, the early game advantages they're able to accrue have been extraordinary. We also saw some experimentation with putting Chovy on Karma this week. I just don't think that's how this team is going to work. We need to see Chovy on high damage, carry champions in the mid lane. I don't want to see him on utility. I would rather see Canyon and Keen on some of these utility champs, which is how they started the season. But you can definitely see the upside for GenG is there. Keen in particular has been absolutely massive. Had a bad series against KT, but you look at the way he's played some of his Darius games, have been super dominant. Olaf on the carries, as well as some of the more traditional like Udyrs and Cassantes, had some mega games on those as well. So GenG, due to the number of weapons they have on this team and their ability to play so many different champions with massive champion pools, it may take them some time to work out all the kinks, but the upside is obviously enormous for GenG. At number 2, in spite of losing to GenG in week 1, again, we're not going to rate those early results too strongly. We have T1. Now, unlike GenG, they haven't lost to anybody since that initial week of competition, and you could make an argument that they did have a little bit of a hiccup in the telecom war by letting that game go. But I think Beryl and Pyosik in particular in that game 1 played extremely well, and otherwise T1 has just been getting business done. Their latest test against D+ went just as we thought it would with a T1 victory. And considering that their last matches in the first round robin are versus Fox, Freecs, and Nongshim, we really should expect this team to run the table and end up kind of 8-1 by the end of the round robin. They have a kind of formulaic way of playing, particularly out of the mid lane right now. But how can you argue with it when some of these mid lane champions are just so well-rounded, versatile, and good? Like the way they play is first pick Faker, early pick Faker, an Orianna, Azir, Nico, or Corki, right? And they allow other players, particularly Zeus, to have some counter picks, so that they can really get some of these advantages. This team is still absolutely extraordinary when it comes to crafting pick compositions with long-range engage. Still almost unbeatable with double AD carry down in the bot side whenever they can get it, even if they have been trending more towards like Senna, Tom, Kench in their more recent matches. And they are still maybe the best Baron team in the world. They can hide their ability to do Baron in very strange ways based on their composition, attacking it over walls from red side, for example, and sneaking it, as well as being able to win a team fight, turn it into a Baron and a victory almost instantaneously. So their ability to close, also really good. This team is, simply cleaner than GenG at this point in time, even if GenG player for player might arguably have the higher ceiling. Faker shot calling is extremely key here. And our number 1 team in our initial power rankings is going to be BLG over in the LPL. The other super team that was assembled in the offseason alongside GenG. BLG has roared out to a 5-0 start at the moment, and they've taken some really respectable wins, beating top esports, beating LNG, right, over the course of these games. They play JDG and IG next week, which are going to be very crucial matches for them, particularly that JDG one. But this team has lived up to the promise of its creation. I mean, we have Bin and Knight on this team now. They're the new additions. Bin is still drawing Jax bans, even in a post-Divine Sunderer Jax world, which really opens up the drafts in many ways for them. Knight is such a massively talented and versatile mid laner with a lot of feared champions like his Syndra that you constantly have to consider, even though they're kind of fringe meta picks right now. But interestingly, it hasn't really been Knight or Bin that this team has been playing through. They've been playing through Elk and On in the bot lane, who are also, one of the contenders for best bot lane duo in the world at the moment. Jun has been focusing a lot down there. So it seems like when Elk and On get some of these bot lane advantages, they can snowball this game from like level 2, level 3 into a super clean win. You want an example of this? Go watch game 1 in their initial series versus top esports, and you will see Brand jungle, dominant bot lane, directly into a victory for BLG. And Jun really is able to be unlocked and still play a lot of his carry champions. Like, he's playing Kindred still. He's playing Brand still. He plays more high damage jungle carries than any of these other elite top teams. And so that has kind of informed his identity because he's able to invade off the pressure that his lanes are creating and make life hell for the enemy jungler. Knight also joins him a lot on these invades, and they get a lot of kills, slowing down enemy jungle pressure pretty significantly. So BLG, we knew they were going to be good. We didn't know they were going to be this good this fast, and they're playing in a different way than any other team on this list when it comes to where they're pressuring the map and the champion pools in which they are doing it with. It has been very unique. So Bilibili on top of the world right now. Could have been GenG, man, but you lost to KT. It would have been a close conversation in that case, but that defeat, really moved BLG and solidified them as the top team. We'll see if we have any movement if they happen to lose to JDG in the coming week of competition. So that's it, guys. We'll be updating these power rankings every couple of weeks as it makes sense, and we have more data to go on. Till next time.